It's November. On this coastline at the point where the English Channel meets the North Sea, the gulls wheeling above the cliffs hang in the air like the parts of a giant mobile. Time seems to stand still, as if poised for something to happen. Suddenly, a small group of advanced scouts flies into view. They are the first of a long procession of birds that flies along the coast just off the shore. The great autumn migration has begun. Squadron after squadron flies steadily past, tireless and intent on their destination. As winter approaches, food becomes increasingly scarce for birds in cold countries, so they fly south. These long-haul travelers land along the coasts of the North Sea and the English Channel. For some, it's just a rest stop on their way somewhere else. Others stay here all winter. The entire coastline is not just a huge migratory hub. It's a paradise for birds. This flat, windswept landscape doesn't look much like a paradise. So why do so many species come here to rest, feed, and bring up their young? The dunes and mudflats of this coastline exemplify one of Europe's typical ecosystems. At the foot of the dunes, these bright orange sea buckthorn berries have attracted a crowd of small birds. Thrushes and greenfinches are feasting on the vitamin C-rich fruit. Even insect eaters like robins and warblers have joined in. In cold weather, insects are scarce, so they turn vegetarian for a while. They don't have short, stout beaks of seed-eating birds, but they seem to manage all right without. Life on this coastline is governed by the interwoven rhythms of the seasons and the tides. Twice a month, at the full moon and the new moon, very high tides occur. Twice a year, at the spring and autumn equinoxes, exceptionally high tides occur, often accompanied by storms. The lives of the inhabitants of this strange paradise are ruled by the ebb and flow of the tides. In winter, conditions here are harsh, but birds that have come from colder countries are ideally equipped for the cold. At high tide, the shelduck congregate on land to rest. They sleep facing into the wind and do not mind rain. Their plumage is totally waterproof. In winter, ducks and geese have to build up sufficient reserves to fly back to Scandinavia in the spring and breed successfully. So they are feeding themselves up now. And they look as if they relish the task. Although gray-lag geese are vegetarian, they have teeth. Their beaks have a serrated edge like a knife, which they use to cut grass and filter water. This avian paradise furnishes roots, young shoots, and seeds. Every bird in the world seems to have flocked to this bay. At very high tides, oyster catchers gather by the thousands on the few sandbanks that are still above water. Fortunately, they like company, especially while they're waiting for their lunch. This sandbank seems like a safe bet, but the water is creeping up on them again. The tide goes out as fast as it came in. The bay is once again a vast, empty expanse of mud. But beneath the surface, the seemingly deserted mudflat is alive. A crab slowly emerges, not properly awake yet. It still has sand in its eyes. But it puts its best mandible forward, ready to set to work cleaning up the beach. The lives of shellfish and other small sea creatures are also governed by the tides. When the sea goes out, they bury themselves in the mud. The mud is a treasure chest of marine life. Millions of creatures live in it. Here and there, water is spouting and bubbling out of the mud. Each set of bubbles belongs to a cockle. They occur when the mollusk exhales water using its built-in siphon. Underwater, the cockles open. They move around with the aid of this large muscular tongue. In fact, it's not a tongue at all, but a foot. They also use it to bury themselves in the sand. razor shell edges are very sharp. They cut through the sand just like a blade. Like cockles, razor clams use a foot to bury themselves. And like other shellfish, they have siphons. These consist of two flexible tubes, one for sucking and the other for blowing, to keep the water and the particles it contains flowing around the mollusk's filter system, which is used for both breathing and feeding. The mudflats are a treasure trove of worms, snails, starfish, shrimp, and other curious creatures for the birds. You need special tools to catch them. Despite its name, the oyster catcher rarely eats oysters. It prefers cockles. Its strong beak stitches the sand like a deadly sewing machine. Between two high tides, it can find, open, and swallow hundreds of mollusks. To open a cockle, the oyster catcher inserts its beak between the two valves of the cockle and severs the muscle that joins them. With its long curved beak, the curlew can extract animals that are deeply buried, even underwater. It doesn't compete with the oyster catcher. Each species has a specialized tool for catching particular types of prey. After the meal, it's time for a wash. The oyster catcher wets its plumage and goes to sleep on one leg to rest the other. Along the coast in another bay, common seals loll on the beach. The behavior in which they lift their heads in flippers is called a banana. It may look ridiculous, but there's a very good reason for it. The seals are keeping themselves warm by keeping the parts of their anatomy that are not protected by a layer of fat out of the cold water. The seals, too, live their lives according to the rhythm of the tides. But unlike the birds, they feed underwater and rest on sandbanks at low tide, loafing idly until the sea comes back in. It's late March. The bay is enveloped in a spring sea mist. In the avian paradise, the long nesting season is beginning. The black-headed gulls have chosen a safe islet as a site for their colony. The advantage of nesting in groups is that the more birds there are, the more eyes they have to spot predators, and the more beaks to defend themselves if they're attacked. Black-headed gulls are not black-headed all year round. Their head turns start for the spring, for the mating season. The lowered head position is typical of their courtship display, as is the way the courting couples face in different directions. This behavior is a sign of peaceful intentions. Pointing their beaks at each other could be interpreted as a threat. The change of season triggers another migration. For winter visitors like the greylag, it's time to fly back to Scandinavia to breed. Other migrants have just arrived here from Africa. They come from Senegal and Mauritania to nest here on the coast of Northwest Europe. The shelduck keeps a close eye on the new arrivals. These odd-looking waders are spoonbills. The main purpose of their distinctively shaped bill is to sweep the water for food. The sheldrake is partially reassured, but it keeps an eye open, or rather, pretends to. In fact, its eyes are closed, but its white eyelid markings look like open eyes. It's a clever device to hoodwink observers. The spoonbills are gathering nesting materials, but it's not easy. Where can such cumbersome birds possibly nest? Pine woods are an ideal refuge for large wading birds. In the treetops, they're safe from predators, like black-heeled gulls on islets. The gray herons are the first to move in. They settle down to building their nests or restoring nests made the previous year. But the heronry is home to other birds besides herons. The various species mingle. For all of them, there is safety in numbers. So little egrets, spoonbills, and white storks join the herons in the treetops for a few weeks. They all have special breeding plumage. It makes for a spectacular fashion parade. As you would expect, the little egret wears an aigrette of decorative long plumes. And herons blush when they're in love. Their dull yellow beaks turn bright orange, or even red for the most ardent. Spoonbills wear an orange cravat and plumes on the back of their heads. All these decorative touches are visual signs that play a part in courtship displays and breeding. While the spoonbill ties itself in knots, the heron coats its feathers with an oily powder extracted from the down of its breast. That way, it never risks going out without its makeup. However, neighbors don't always get along in the heronry. Raising your crest and sticking out your beak are threatening gestures. At the height of the conflict, the incumbent of the nest pretends to tidy it. It probably does so to calm its nerves. But this apparent sign of self-confidence is enough to discourage the intruder, who flies off. It's not necessarily the strongest bird that wins, but the most tenacious, and the one that feels the most in the right. There are also mammals in this avian paradise. Roe deer help control the scrub. They chew their food with their molars. In fact, they chew their cud just like cattle. Highland cattle are not native to this area, but imported from Scotland. They are unusually hardy and ideally suited to wetlands. By keeping the grass short, they help maintain the open landscape needed by the protected species that live here. Between the sea and the dunes, a graceful creature has just alighted on the water. The long-legged avocet is one of the most elegant of wading birds. For the nesting season, the avocet colony has set up home just opposite the black-headed gulls. Together, they make a terrific racket. But who is that funny bespectacled little fellow spying on the colonies? He's a little ringed plover. His black neck ring and yellow spectacles are breeding plumage. He's all set to join in with the spring display, but he hasn't found a partner yet. Avocets begin their courtship ritual by pretending to wash. It's a way of identifying themselves and getting to know each other. The male circles the female agitatedly. If she's willing to mate, she makes it very clear by lowering her head and raising her rump. This gets the male even more excited. The actual mating is over soon. It's immediately followed by a token quarrel. The female black-headed gull will not consent to mate until she has received a wedding present. That may seem grasping of her, but she has to be sure that the male is a good provider, who will be able to catch enough fish for their brood and will pass on good genes to his descendants. She knows what she's doing. The little spy has finally found himself a partner. He solemnly stamps his feet, showing off by puffing out his chest and spreading his tail. It works. The avocet's nest is basic. They just clear a spot and settle in a hollow in the earth. In May, more migrants fly over the coastal mudflats, like the geese a few weeks earlier. In their northern homelands, spring starts later in the year. The plovers, stints, sandpipers, and godwits have all donned their breeding plumage. They're heading for Iceland, Scandinavia, and Siberia to mate and bring up their young. Migration is a complex phenomenon that spans virtually the whole year. Between the first and last arrivals and departures, flocks of travelers are constantly coming and going. The avian paradise is shrouded in thick fog. Great lumps of sea foam are being washed up onto the beach. This foam is not caused by chemical pollution. It's been present for a number of years and is caused by massive proliferation of a particular type of plant plankton. Out at sea, the layer of foam can be up to 2 meters thick. Sandhoppers are crustaceans related to shrimps. Although sometimes called sand fleas, they do not bite. They eat the various sorts of debris the sea washes up on the beach. As well as keeping the beach clean, these little creatures are a useful source of food for birds. The dunes at the top of the beach mark the line where the shifting world of the mudflats end and terra firma begins. The sea never comes in this far, so plants can grow in the dunes. Marram grass is unique in liking dry, bare terrain. Its deep roots stabilize the sand and prevent erosion. It both creates and protects sand dunes. This soft ground is easy for wild rabbits to burrow in. They live in the sand, never venturing far from their burrows, ears pricked and nose quivering to detect everything that happens in their surroundings. The entire rabbit family deposit their droppings in specific places to mark their territory. In this sandy habitat, their latrines are invaluable as a fertilizer for plants. In the heronry, the spoon-billed chicks are growing very fast. These are only 2 weeks old. The parent birds do not regurgitate food. Instead, the young help themselves directly from the parent bird's craw. The red and yellow coloring on the underside of the adult birds' throats is a visual marker for the young. Luckily, their beaks are still soft at this stage. It's bath time on the sand islets. Bathing together reinforces social ties within the black-headed gull colony. It's now June, and the group is noticeably larger. The chicks are able to walk only hours after they hatch. It's vital if they are to survive. Their speckled down is good camouflage. The neighbor's brood is also starting to become less dependent. The young avocets can already feed themselves. Until its beak acquires its full upward curve, a young avocet will merely peck at the odd morsel. Like the avocet, the juvenile oyster catcher is already recognizable by its beak. Each young bird is a miniature version of its parents and a promise of continuation of its species. In the avian paradise, the gray heron is a predator, a deadly sniper who lies in wait. Its beak is like high-precision sights. It may even compensate for the refraction caused by the water's surface. For other birds, hunters like the heron are potential enemies' chick killers. The heron has spotted a duckling in the tall vegetation. But it's hunting too close to the gull colony. They dive bomb it from the air, and black-headed gulls can be vicious. The heron is being mobbed from all sides. Even the coots join in. Killing a baby bird may seem cruel, but the heron has young of its own to feed. Wild boar are another threat to young birds. They are not peaceful herbivores, but voracious omnivores. They eat roots, seeds, fungi, voles, eggs, and when they can get them, fledglings. Wild boar piglets are striped until they are 6 months old. They're almost invisible among the pine branches. Back in the treetops, the young spoonbills are stretching their wings to strengthen their muscles. From its nest, the young heron watches attentively. It already looks like a predator. For both heron and spoonbills, the big day of their maiden flight is not far off now. In the bay, other predators are fishing underwater. Seals are the star act here. 2 species of seals frequent these waters where the English Channel meets the North Sea. Gray seals, which can be identified by their elongated muzzle, and especially common seals, which are typically found on and around sandbanks. At low tide, common seals like to bask in the sun. They look awkward on land, wriggling their way along like giant caterpillars. Between the dunes, the wind has scooped hollows in the sand. Some of them have fresh water in the bottom of them. The water attracts dragonflies, which settle on the irises. This unusual habitat is home to equally unusual inhabitants. Rare plants thrive in the dune pools. Carpets of bog pimpernel and wild orchids flourish there, tinging the muted coastal landscape with their delicate colors. No land plants can survive in salt water, but sheltered from the waves by the dunes, marram grass and other pioneer vegetation turn the sandy desert into fertile meadow. In this bay, a short way along the coast, another microcosm teems with life in the summer heat. Weevils and ladybirds disport themselves at the top of plant stalks, making hay while the sun shines. But everyone is potentially someone else's dinner. The tiger beetle is a war machine. With jaws of steel and highly mobile legs, it is faster than any other land animal of comparable size. A miniature cheetah of the dunes. It runs so fast, it frequently has to stop to refocus its eyes. Patience, not speed, is the antlion larva's specialty. It digs a crater in the sand and buries itself in the middle, leaving only its mandible showing. Then it waits. Hours. Days. Weeks, if need be. Finally, a potential victim slides into the trap. It tries to escape, but the antlion throws sand at it to make sure it falls into the pit. The ant is doomed. Mounds of earth or sand are the northern wheat ear's favorite hangout. The dunes are a good hunting ground for them. Like many summer visitors, wheat ears are insect eaters. When autumn comes, they will fly south to where insects are more plentiful. But not all insects are edible. These cinnabar moth caterpillars are devouring ragwort, a poisonous plant. They absorb the poison and themselves become toxic for other animals. Their bright colors serve as a warning. The adult moths are just as colorful and just as poisonous. Perched at the top of another poisonous plant, the sea spurge, snails wait for the heat of the day to pass. During the day, they cling to the tops of the stems to avoid being cooked on the burning hot sand. When night comes, the famished mollusks attack the surrounding vegetation. Summer is nearly over, and they need to build up their reserves before going into hibernation. The coastal landscape is not a monotonous desert of sand and mud. Every inch of it is inhabited by insects, mammals, and birds of all shapes, sizes, and colors in their thousands, and the air is alive with their cries. Attracted to the safe havens of protected areas, they provide a magnificent, never-ending spectacle. The geese and duck arriving from the north already herald the return of autumn. In the avian paradise, one round of seasons is coming to an end and another is beginning.